Welcome to our very first session on the mini conference on elites and power structures, which is part of the SASE 2023 conference. Of course, a lot of us will meet in Rio in a week's time, but we do an advanced start here with 4 exciting presentations. I should have enabled everyone to share their screen. So as soon as I finish just introducing everyone, we will be able to go on. But first of all, on behalf of all the organizers, I would love to welcome you to the mini conference. And I'll say that when we decided to make this proposal, we hoped that the SASE meetings could be an annual meeting place for scholars interested in the work on elites. And this is, of course, also on the backdrop of Renaissance in elite studies. We've moved from a period in time 15 years ago where elites were forgotten in the social sciences to now being rich and fast-growing terrain with strong mythological theoretical developments combined with rich empirical studies of local, national, and transnational elites, power elites, field-specific elites, and professional elites, expert, and much more. As you'll see during the 10 sessions we have during the SASE meetings, and indeed already today, and also in particular today, thanks to those of you who have gotten up extremely early. If you are not as me, based in Europe, it's 10 o'clock here in Copenhagen, but if you are in South America or North America, thank you very much for showing up. And remember also that we have a session later today, which is also online at a more humane point in time. However, what we also thought about in the group of organizers was that it also felt like a time where elite scholars, in the sense that we study elites, not in the sense that we are particularly good at what we're doing, should meet more regularly to discuss our work and also to see how we can push the field forward. So we're really happy that we have a chance to discuss this together, to bring a lot of different approaches to elites, both because we think elites are extremely important to understand the broader breakdown in current social orders, transformations that are the overall theme of the SASE meeting this year, and to understand the roles that elites play in this regard. So we think that the study of elites is really, across the social sciences, a really important topic and something we can build. And we're very happy for the organizers of SASE and our local Brazilian colleagues who are partly also organizers, Andrea and Hager, that they have helped us organizing this. So just in the spirit of this conversation together, I was hoping to just briefly tell you what is actually going on. So today, virtually, we meet now at 5 o'clock Rio de Janeiro time to discuss elite and philanthropy with 4 great papers. And later this afternoon, for more papers on economic elites, the composition and cleavages will be discussed. So we hope to see you there as well. And then at the 3 days at SASE, we have first a session on elites and ideational change, then a session on elites and their regimes of power, and lastly, on Thursday, discussing comparative studies of economic elites. Furthermore, then on Friday, we discussed political cleavages between elites and non-elites, political attitudes and values of elites, elites and their modes of legitimation, and economic elites, their coordination and mobilization. Lastly, on Saturday, we have an orphanage critic sessions on the Uncomfortable Off book and a session on morphology and trajectory of elites. One thing we also hope to bring with this program is also the ongoing work that some of us are engaged in trying to build a world elite database, gathering data on different elites across the globe. So we hope also to be able to discuss further how a comparative framework of elite studies can look. Now, for today, each presenter will have 20 minutes. So we will be have to be quite time efficient. I'll try to stop you presenters as soon as you've spoken for 12 minutes, and then the discussion will have a couple of minutes to wrap up their points. So we'll have 5 minutes at the end, hopefully, for general questions and discussions from the audience. So this is basically the outline. I will try to chair the session, and since we are now almost at 5:10 revolutionary time, I will stop sharing my screen and I will give the floor to Pedro, so he can present his paper on the emergency and crystallization of the philanthropic world of the elite, philanthropic world in Brazil, from solidarity approach to informist approach from 1995 to 2022. So Pedro, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours, and I'll write to you in the chat when the 12 minutes are gone.
So thank you so much, Christoph. Also, I'm so happy to stay here, to be here, to present for you, for everyone. Good morning, and even virtually. So I will, in order to be more concise, precise, and even comprehensible, I will read my presentation. Because of a question of the time, I will concentrate my presentation just one part of my paper, more precisely what I understand as a reformist approach. So I will begin to present here. First of all, I would like to propose a minimal definition of what is philanthropy. Philanthropy can be understood as a strategy for setting the world of profit apart. There are native concepts such as benevolence, charity, generosity, often express operations of negation and distancing regarding the world of profit, the world of interests. The private foundation is the legal entity par excellence of philanthropy, the donation of access for a non-economic and therefore non-profit-making purpose. The analytical consequence of this definition can be seen in two other works on philanthropy, more precisely the American philanthropy. Nicolas Guillot and Olivier Zoom studied philanthropy in the late 19th century in the United States, when the country was undergoing an intense process of capital concentration and centralization in the wake of national reunification and the end of the Civil War. At that time, economic elites became aware of national concerns and their projects went further and further beyond local ones. It was no longer about creating libraries, museums, and a hospital. According to Nicolas Guillot, capitalism became philanthropists by reconverting economic capital into cultural capital. In that regard, the big American foundations contributed to build a vast circuit of technical and scientific institutions in planetary level. According to Olivier Zanz, modern philanthropy is also an alliance with reformers. Philanthropy is no longer synonymous with a strict obedience to the will of a magnate. On the contrary, philanthropy constitutes an act of delegation to actors recognized as notables in political and scientific domains. With the presence of them, foundations is isolated from the interference of the family and the business world. The act of capital recognition is also an act of delegation, since the holders of private money authorize other individuals to act in their place and on their behalf. In short, what is socially and historically variable here is the path through which foundations will traverse to deny their economic origin, as well as what expertise will be favored or not during this movement. In Brazil, we are witnessing a significant growth in philanthropy. Until 1995, there were around 25 organizations operating in Brazil, whereas today, the philanthropic world was around 116 members. As a result, 84% of Brazilian philanthropic organizations are created in 2000s, with almost half coming into being more precisely after 2010. This growth was occurred without any change in tax legislation on income and health. On the contrary, recent years have been marked by an intense process of concentration and centralization of capital, with a large wave of states authorized mergers and acquisition, as well as the affirmation of financial markets as the greatest space for profitability. However, the most surprising question is not the quantitativity, but above all, the qualitative change in philanthropy in Brazil. Therefore, this research aims to explain this change. I will try to explicit my problem of my research problem. What are the reasons that lead the foundations privileged engaged in projects at the local level, such as extracurricular activities in schools, outskirts, cities close to industrial plants, and in the management of the public equipment and cultural centers, with the objective of acting in the absence of the state for a reformist attitude, now interested in mobilized expertise in order to identify public problems and their best remedies at the national level. So we need to analyze more precisely the circuit of delegations and authorization of the actors who embodied philanthropic actions. That is, the actor who constitute the philanthropic world by serving as spokespersons of the foundations. I will be quick here, but the lecture of Bourdieu is very inspiring to think of philanthropy as also a source of knowledge production. So let's go ahead. In order to examine the distribution of power and the relations of opposition in the current moment of philanthropic world, we propose a multiple correspondence analysis. The research also uses 50 semi-directive interviews with a variety of actors that constitute this world: board members, executive directors, researchers, and managements. In sum, there are actors from 14 foundations and 19 research centers compose this MCA population. Qualitative studies have shown a remarkable circulation between individuals within organization due to a number of factors that I don't have time to discuss here now. We reshoot two axes of opposition. The first concerns actors, organizations, and techniques whose presence is more universal, as they accumulate more positions and they are more required to solve various public problems. The second concerns a division of labor within the philanthropic field, distinguishing scientific activities of evidence production and managerial activities of political influence. The space was constructed by 7 variables and 41 modality variables. First, extension, the number of positions an actor occupies beyond his work position, for example, on a board of directors, scientific committee, a columnist, a professor of the department. Duration, total numbers of years of presence in this world since this first position. Institutionality, the educational institution where the actor is most associated in the year of 2022, always starting from the highest level, bachelor, master, professor, etc. Career, the most developed professional path in terms of years of involvement before becoming part of the philanthropic world. Expertise, actual activity in this world. Target, organization, political level of action. Is the target is municipal, state, or federal? Affiliation, the economic group that funds the organization. So let's see the results. On the one hand, economists are the ones who circulate the most inside and outside the philanthropic world, insofar as they occupy many of the positions between 6 and 3 and between 10 and 7. They are rather linked to national interventions, that is federal, and were already engaged in projects that permeated various social fields. The modality centered scholar as a prior career refers to professor in some way linked to think tanks. This refers to the fact that the various foundations often call on a specific group of specialists, mainly economists, to devise action plans and new agenda for public problems. On the other hand, we see actors who have no position other than their current job, so they have zero as extension, whose organizations are often more locally oriented and have been formed by an amorphous set of academic institutions, lack an identity of their own in this world, what I coded as rest of Brazil. Moreover, the rest of Brazil modality results from the recoding of a plurality of academic institutions that do not reach 5% of the population. This more localized position is expressed in project management expertise, which favors direct contact with the territories. It is remarkable to highlight the other structural approximations of this dimension of this first axis. Since this local condition is shared by those who exercise expertise in human science and whose previous career was that of educator. Now let's discuss the second axis. On the one hand, the more practical side of decision making is made of the expertise of strategic planning and management and advocacy and articulation, notably the more necessary techniques for influence. And on the other hand, the more theoretical side of decision making is made of economics and statistics and biological science, notably the dominant knowledge in this world. Harvard is the most exclusive institutional space for top managers. In second place, there are other foreign institutions, for example, Columbia, Berkeley, Princeton, grouped in the rest of the world because each does not reach 5% of the total population. Axis 2 express a difference in the style of philanthropic action. Foundations linked to 3G Capital Investment Fund, approximating actors from strategic consultations and private sector, are opposed to foundations linked to Itaú Unibanco, that is the largest commercial bank in Brazil and the southern hemisphere, and to organizations with several donations. 2 minutes left. Okay, several donations. What I call it as collective funds. The opposition between banks and investment funds here appears in the philanthropic world as 3G Capital. Foundations have introduced practices such as bonus payments for results, activity, and targets for improving performance indicator, while Itaú Unibanco foundations are considered more traditional. To check just To take just one example, the director of a foundation earns the full annual bonus just if his team succeeds in approving 20 infra-legislative change in partner subnational units. I will try to be very quick here. So new and pioneering foundation increasingly recruit mainstream economists and strategic consultants. Economists and consultants justify entering the philanthropic field due to a growing dissatisfaction with their careers because of the dominant research teams and of prevailing work conditions, respectively. Foundations recruit actors from the dominant institutions of the economy, either in practice, such as strategic consultant, or in theory, such as orthodox economics, but looking for deny them. In other words, philanthropy actualizes the dimension of the social as the other, as the opposite of the economy. I will try to conclude here, just as a way to highlight the difference between the older approach. To put it more succinctly, the first Brazilian foundations are critical of the action of American foundation in Latin America. Therefore, the foundation spokesperson incorporates the American foundation mea culpa concerning their support for dictatorship on a global scale. This new reformist attitude engaged in producing a new elite comes into opposition to the first generation of philanthropic foundation, when they are precisely opposed to the excessive focus on the high education level in the vision of the production enlightened elite to change Brazil. What the first generation sought was not to transform the state from within, but to define the public problems to be solved and the most effective ways to do so. On the contrary, the objective was to build a new social organization and local leaders close to the communities. Here, I just would like to finish with this quote because I guess it's very illustrative for this first moment in the historical context. As said by the director of Kellogg Foundation for Latin America, I had the responsibility of reviewing the social organizations here in Latin America because the military regime was leaving Brazil, as it was leaving Argentina, as it was leaving Chile, as it was leaving Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico. Therefore, the civil society was in a very favorable moment to be supported. So I hope to be a good presentation and conference for everyone. And one more, thank you so much to listen to that. Thank you.
Now, do you have the next paper presentation by François Schoenberger on the painful path to the economic elite? Again, François, you have 12 minutes. I'll try to write to you in the chat when there's about 2 minutes left, so you know when time is almost up. The floor, François, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Perfect, sounds good. I'm trying to share my screen right now. Hopefully it works. Can you hear me first? Yes, perfect. And can you see my screen as well? Okay, perfect.
Yes, yes.
So I started a quick look at the time. All right, so thank you very much, the organizer first. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to present this paper today. Sorry for not being able to make it to Rio. That was a really tight period. I'm delivering my PhD in less than a month now, so it's like quite a stressful period. So, and I'm also looking forward to your comments because what I'm going to talk about today is a paper I published in French already, but I'd like to augment it for an English version, so I'll be really happy to have your comments on it. So basically, in the literature on elite, so we know a lot about the path to the economic elite. So there is this book of Shams Khan highlighting the role of elite higher education, elite high school to get on the right track, to get to the top universities. And then there is this work from Lauren Rivera about the recruitment onto the economic elite, namely investment banks, corporate law firms, and consulting firms. But what comes after? Once you enter the doors of the investment banks, what's happening after? So we have few data about this period of the early stages of the career of the economic elite. So this is what I'm going to talk about, focusing on one part of what River identified as the elite path. So I will focus on investment banks and more specifically on M&A bankers, which are the most prestigious part of investment banks. So quickly, in general, corporate finance has three missions. The first one is mergers and acquisitions, so advising company transactions. So they have shareholders as clients, and they explain them how and they help them to structure a transaction, so selling or buying a corporation. And then there are two other activities: insurance of corporate bonds and capital increase operation. But I'm going to focus more specifically on the most prestigious part, which is mergers and acquisitions, or we'll say M&A from now on. And all the most prestigious banks, they have M&A activities, so Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Rothschild, and so forth. And it's extremely lucrative occupation. So like during the first year, like right after the top university or the top business school, people start in France with more than 1,100 euros. So they're already in the top 2% of the population right after university. And then it leads also to top position in the corporate field, but also in investment banks. So basically, I think M&A can be really seen as a pathway to the corporate elite. But at the same time, it's a very intense working culture there. So in 2013 in London, there is an intern that died after 72 hours of work without sleeping. And from the interview I conducted, I could see that the intensity at work was not a legend. And this is a few of the examples that I have. So like just one example quickly, I start at 8 a.m. and go to bed at 2 a.m. every night. And that's not an exception. So I had this type of comments from a lot of bankers. So this is the easiest resource question that I come up with is like, why do they do that? Why do they accept this type of working conditions when they are graduated from the top universities and top business school? They could basically do whatever they want. So why do they go on this very intense, like which is the most actually intense working environment for this type of people, obviously. So in the literature of elite, I won't go through that, I will go very quick. There's one question that has been raised is like, why do people want to be part of the elite? So it's usually taken for granted that it's a good thing to join the elite for them because you are in the part who have a disproportionate amount of capital. So it should be a good thing to be there. But actually, it's not that obvious. And this is what I'm going to talk about. So for this research, I'm going to rely on what I've done my PhD. So there are mainly qualitative methods. So interviews. I did an ethnography. I worked a year as a financial analyst in a Swiss M&A boutique, but I'm not going to use that today. I also have two databases, one on M&A banks and another one on people from graduated from a business school, a top business school in France. But now I'm going to focus on the interviews, especially the one on the top of the field of the bank. So like really the part that is a part of what we could call like the economic elite. And the outline of the presentation will be twofold. So first, I will describe quickly how painful this job can be. So what are the working conditions in corporate banking? And the second part will be a attempt to have some explanatory ideas about why they do what they do. So first, I will describe the case of Olympia. Obviously, the name has been changed. So she graduated from a top business school in France, and she did a couple of internships in corporate banking before she actually started her career in London in, I can name the bank. It's, I know it's recorded, so I'm not going to name the bank. So it's one of the top American banks that there is, basically. And it's a very competitive working environment where people are ranked every year. So everybody from the same rank in the bank have a ranking. So the ranking is divided in three parts. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. but there's only one tier 1 in a team. So it's extremely competitive, and it has an impact on the bonuses they are able to earn after each year. And she's actually extremely successful in the bank, and she is the one in the tier 1. So she has been awarded for that, and she is about to be fast-tracked, as they say in the bank, meaning that in the bank the hierarchy is very strict, and the pathway to climb the ladder is also very systematic. So basically, it's 1 year per rank, and there is no way around that, except for the fast track. So very few individuals might have the opportunity to skip 1 rank if they overperform, and she's part of these overperforming bankers. But the cost for that is extreme working hours. So I would just read this quote. So I would say that on average, I never went home before 2 a.m. Never. For 15 months, I think I slept between 4 and 5 hours maximum. And very few weekends. I had very few weekends to myself. It was hardcore. And that's not an extraordinary statement from what I've gathered. But at some point, she encountered very serious health problems. So I'm going to read this quote as well. So the client called me in the morning at 10 a.m. and to say, Olympia, I hope you are in a good shape because you are not going to sleep all weekend. And I knew that when he told me that, it was true. I was on call at 5 a.m. with the client, and I stayed in the office until 3:30 on Saturday. I went home, I dozed for half an hour, and when I woke up, I couldn't feel the left side of my body. I was dragged to Paris in an emergency because I couldn't walk anymore. I mean, I got really scared. I said to myself, I think I'm going to die, actually. So that was quite extreme. One of the most extreme case I had directly. After that, she decided to leave the bank a few months later after she got fast tracked. And now she works on the investment side. So it's still intense, but much less intense than in banking. So she works in the private equity fund. And I have other examples that are also dramatic. And that's actually not all of the quotes that I have, but like some example of what people experience in banking. And what's interesting here is that they have a tendency to downplay the gravity, the severity of the health risks that they face. So I give an example. Look, I was a bit tired. I coughed for quite a long time. I think I coughed a bit of blood once. So and he was very minimizing like the impact of that. Another example is from a banker. We were discussing health problems, and he told me that it's a myth. There is no health problem in banking. And right after that, so I asked him, so you have no case around you of people who have any health problem? And he told me, oh, there was already an associate. Associate is like after 4 years in the bank. There was already an associate who had a heart attack. I have a friend at the French bank who had a stroke. He had a stroke at home. So basically, he could actually find from the top of his head 2 examples of people under 30 who had major health issues during the discussion. So that's just an example of how tricky working in banking can be during the first years. So it's a costly sacrifice. So they work between 70 and 90 hours per week during the normal weeks, and sometimes they have rush periods that can last for months, but they work 100 hours or even more. And they work some weekends, for some of them it's all like every weekend, and during holidays as well. And that lasts during the first 6 to 9 years in M&A. And the more prestigious the bank, the harder the conditions are. So basically, as we have seen, they are endangering their health, but obviously they are also reducing their personal life to the minimum. So like just an example, like dinners in the evening are not possible, drinks in the evening are not possible, and like a lot of quotes like that. So why do they accept these working conditions? So a quick answer could be prestige and money. So it's very prestigious, prestigious occupation. They are at the heart of the main economic decision of the country, or even of the continent. It's a very lucrative, as we have said, working occupation, and like they start very high, but then the income like rises extremely quickly afterwards. And then like right after 2 years, they join the top 1% earners. So I think after 7 years at the bank, they'll be paid between, like it could be wide, but between 400,000 to 500,000 a year. So it's very, very, very impressive. But the puzzle is still open. Like, why do they desire actually money at the cost of their personal life and their health? Why do they desire this particular type of prestige? Because it's a very specific prestige, not academic prestige, for instance. And why do they endure these working conditions and others don't? So there is still, like, this puzzle is still open. And then I'm going to come to the most important slide of my presentation. So this is why. So I'm going to use Bourdieu and its concept of habitus. So basically, from what I've seen, the family plays an important role. So this part is more speculative because I don't have systematic data on these individuals, but from what I could gather from my interviews. So basically, they have a taste for corporate banking. Like more than 25% of the interviewees I had, they have a parent who is actually an entrepreneur. So they have been involved in the corporate business from a very young age. Then they have also been socialized through hard work because they have seen the parents work a lot, also from a very young age. And that comes a lot in interviews. Like I always saw my parents work a lot at home. So the notion of work has always been very strong for me, and particularly the fact of success through work. So this is from an interviewee who had his two parents who were entrepreneurs. And then in this type of fraction of the economic bourgeoisie, they value a lot economic capital rather than cultural capital. There are very, very few individuals who actually are sons or daughters of professors or journalists or in the public sector generally. Most of them, almost everybody, comes from the economic, from an economic social class origin. So I think I have only two cases actually. One son of professor, only one. And then the second part is
François, you have
yes.
to conclude now if you won't have time for any comments.
Oh yes, sure. So I conclude. So I just say quickly that the second part of the early civilization may come from work because they have been to the French class preparatoire that are very, very intense. And we could find similar patterns, I think, in other countries. So I conclude here. So yeah, so basically the path to the corporate elite is not that straightforward. After they open the door of the investment bank, it's still very, very intense. So yeah, thank you very much. I stop here. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, François. Now we will rush on to the next speaker, which is Theresa. So whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you also from my side for having me. I am Theresa Hager. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Linz, where I also work in an interdisciplinary research project called SPACE, Spatial Competition and Economic Policies, and where we actually look at the concept of competition and its performativity on the micro, the meso, and the macro level from this kind of interdisciplinary perspective. Now, as the title suggests, what we like to do in this work is kind of use our insights from competition research and kind of shade or lend a shade or a lens to the problem of the underrepresentation of women in the discipline and in the field of economics. And we like to kind of explain it with this concept of gendered competitive practices. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to provide a working paper yet, so this is kind of a proposal that still has to be like written down and kind of sorted out. But I'm really happy for any feedback that you have and that you might propose to us. So after the 20 minutes of the presentation, you will have an idea of how we plan to contribute to the discussion about the underrepresentation of women in economics via the channel of competitive practices in the discipline, and will also be able to provide us with valuable feedback. Okay, so why look at this problem or at the underrepresentation of women at all? In economics, we have kind of this severe blatant underrepresentation of women. And what we see here is kind of the share of women according to the career stages. So we see there that the share of women isn't that great to begin with. So we have about 35% of new PhD students who are female. But the further we advance in the career then and end up at full professors, the further women actually drop out. And so what we see is that then we end up with about 14% of all full professors being female. This is also what has been called the leaky pipeline, and it represents this blatant underrepresentation, right? The only consolation that we have is that the situation in Europe is slightly better, with 21% of all full professors being female. Now, if we look at it, at the problem at a different angle via different disciplines, then we see that the underrepresentation is extremely persistent. And that's kind of a thing we might think about, okay, there are little women in economics, but that's kind of a thing which is more surprising, right? That this underrepresentation is also super persistent. Now here we have on the graph the share of women in assistant professors and in full professors over different fields and disciplines. And there we see that disciplines and fields that fared worse than economics in 2002, for example, chemistry and math, are now on par with economics. And this might hint to the fact that they probably saw the problem, right, realized the problem, took some measures and increased their share. So now the question, of course, is it an awareness issue in economics? And there we would argue, no, it's not, because already in 1971, the Committee on the Status of Women in the Economics Profession was founded, which was part of the American Economic Association. And this committee also took some action, some measures, but apparently it didn't transfer into the field or into the reality. Additionally to this persistence in the underrepresentation, we also have a kind of an unexplained persistent gender gap in promotions. Thus, several studies find that if we compare promotions to tenure between men and women, then we see a gap. And if we then control for performance measures, for example, productivity with publications, for example, then we see that in all disciplines, this gap vanishes. However, in economics, still 15% remain. Thus, what we can see here is similarly to the unexplained gender pay gap, that we have this unexplained really gap, which can be traced back to pure discrimination. So keeping this in mind, the main question that we were asking ourselves, or which is kind of a pressing issue, is what makes economics so unique in terms of this underrepresentation of women and in its persistence. Yeah, as I've said, we wanted to kind of lend what we know from competition research, and more specifically on research in competition in academia, to this discussion and know what we see. And what we've seen is that in academia, we observe this metrification of evaluation criteria and this increase in competitive formats for evaluation. It is what Wilson et al. Termed the rise of the metric tide, which means an increased relevance of quantitative evaluation methods and techniques throughout all of academia, throughout all the disciplines. What that basically means is that we make use of more rankings, we make use of more impact factors, and this in the end also leads to more competition between researchers and institutions. But again, also in this competitivization dynamic or trend, economics is kind of special, because also there we see this exceptional relevance of quantitative evaluation methods. So they seem to be kind of susceptible to these quantitative evaluation methods. This might be because competition in economics is a theoretical core principle, right, used in theorizing. It's also because in theorizing we have this focus on the individual, which also lends itself nicely to competitive formats. And simply economists are into rankings. So if we think about how important the top 5 journals or studies are in economics. So we see this really increased or important impact of competition in economics. On a side note, also the organizational structure of knowledge production in economics is actually more akin to the natural sciences, with this use of those quantitative evaluation methods, than it is to the social sciences, which is of course peculiar because the matter of study is of course more akin to the social sciences. So why is then the organizational structure of knowledge production different, right? Keeping this in mind and taking into account now this organizational structure and the competition of the field, what we want to do with this work is we want to kind of summarize the existing literature on the causes of the underrepresentation of women in economics. So there already exists this ample research and on different channels and different mechanisms. However, there does not exist a comprehensive review on those channels and mechanisms. And what we then like to do in the second step would be to systematize those arguments and actually provide kind of a model of those channels to disentangle the different layers of those mechanisms and channels and how they work together. And finally, we would also add kind of this new channel on gender competitive practices by using our insights of competition research. Okay, so what do we mean with competitive practices, or with gender competitive practices more specifically? We all know that women and men are subject to different socializations, and we would argue that also socialization with respect to competition is gendered. So what do we mean with that? Men and women encounter competition differently. They differ in respect how they perceive competitive situations, how they act in competitive situations, which strategies they choose, also how successful these strategies then are. So thus they are subject to this different socialization, right? Due to the competition of societies, however, we would argue that men and women encounter competitive formats and competitions to the same degree, but those formats are qualitatively different between men and women, and also between then competition between men and women in the same competition, kind of. Additionally, the competitive formats are influenced, so the rules of those competitions and competitive formats are influenced by the powerful, thus by those people in charge, making competition essentially an asymmetric institution, thus favoring men more compared to women. So now if we look at evidence for gendered competitive practices, and this is quite selective, this is not exhaustive at all, then we kind of see that women shy away from competition, that competition under uncertainty, that's where kind of the number of people who win this competition or how many competitors are actually in the competition is not known to all competitors, favors men. And if we want to qualify like this first finding, then we also see that women actually shy away from interpersonal competition, but not so much in intrapersonal competition. So this is kind of some examples of where we actually experience or see these gendered competitive practices. Now, if we presume gendered competitive practices, and if also in economics, there seems to be a discipline which is quite hardly hit by this competitivization, then that means that, of course, the impact of competition in economics has an impact on the persistent underrepresentation of women. And that is kind of our take that we want to show. Of course, it's not the only channel, and thus I present you here kind of our model of the women's underrepresentation in economics. Again, model here now sounds fancy, of course, then it actually is. What it is basically an illustration of how we think the different channels or how the literature can sort into different channels and how they actually work together. What we see here is that we would group the literature into 3 channels, which is this male-dominated environment on the one hand, the ontology and epistemology of economics, and the societal expectations or the division of labor. All of these channels influence the underrepresentation of women in economics, but at the same time are also influenced by the low share of women in the discipline. Surrounding all of this and kind of influencing everything is the socialization of men and women, where we would also locate gendered competitive practices, which then influence those different channels. And kind of the surrounding trend and phenomenon that we see here is in yellow, this competitivization, where we would argue that competitivization actually creates or reinforces already existing escalating tendencies between the low share and the different channels. So, and I think that time is almost running out, so I won't give you examples for the channels, but just if you're interested, we can then talk about it in the discussion. So I'm going to skip over these. I would have given you examples what we would locate in those. And I would just conclude the presentation with the main points. So we've got this persistent underrepresentation and also this persistent gender promotion gap. We see that we have this competitive environment in economics with a male-centered understanding of competition. And this environment that women then encounter actually aggravates all the strategies to combat the underrepresentation or the low share of women. We try to shed some light on these with our model or with our kind of illustration of how we think they work together. And now I brought you a quote on kind of the culture of an academic discipline by Lundberg and Stearns, where they argue that it can have gendered implications if women either fail to fully adapt to the culture or if they receive differential treatment as a result of it. And I would argue that both of these aspects are kind of highlighted by gendered competitive practices, because first, it is harder for women to adapt to this culture of competition. They are not equipped with the right strategies. And at the same time, they receive differential treatments because of competitive outcomes and competitive strategies that they choose. The work actually has a lot of open ends and open questions. One being, how does the effect of indoctrination and selection play into these channels and into the dynamic of the underrepresentation? And the second one, of course, being in how far this does actually make sense and reflect the experiences made by female economists. Yeah, thank you.